Good morning. It's always fun being the first person, right? Technical problems, too much coffee, in the wrong venue. I should be here, right? Just checking. So I'm Stephanie. I'm from Facebook, but today I'm going to talk about how to move fast and slow and have impact in teams. And the way that I think about it is, how do we have more inclusive research and design to make sure that we build better products? So this is me. I'm Steph, not Stephanie. You can call me Steph if you see me in the hallway. I've been a researcher for about 14 years. And I have worked at a lot of big companies and some small ones. But I've learned quite a lot of lessons over the years. And the world's constantly changing, and we're working in a super fast-paced environment, and all the time we are thinking ahead, making trade-offs, becoming master negotiators of our craft. But before we begin, I just want you guys to take a second. It's Friday. Take a moment. Breathe in, breathe out. This is more for me than you. And to be honest, like, in a fast-paced world like we are today, there's not much time for this. And when we think in a world when we're moving so fast, as we make trade-offs, right? And how do we make sure we're solving the important problems that we have in a complex environment, but getting it right at the same time? So this is hard, right? So I'm going to ask the room, how many designers are here? Okay. You feel the pain. You design this beautiful product, and then someone tells you, no. Or, I can't do it. Or, yeah, that doesn't quite meet your needs. How many researchers in the room? Yes. So I'm a researcher myself. How many times have you heard, yeah, but we don't want to do that. That's not part of our business direction. That's not really where we want to go. And, right? Or they're like, yeah, but I think this is better. How many content strategists in the room? Oh, man. Same for those guys, right? That's part of their craft. They have to always negotiate against other disciplines. How many engineers? Any engineers? Yes, welcome. That's awesome. Engineers, you get to a good point. Your designer goes to your engineer, and you're like, can't build it. Sorry. Another negotiation. How many product managers in the room? Yeah. Your hands up. You do everything. And it's the same for you, right? Like, you're like, my business goals are not aligned with what you're telling me. We're just going to do it anyway and see what happens. So we're constantly making all these trade-offs, negotiating, thinking about how do we move fast and agile. How do we work with all our team members? How do we go so fast that we end up trying to work like this well-oiled machine, but we end up more likely working something like this? Managed chaos. We negotiate, we do lots of things, we cut corners, we're not doing research, we're not doing all the design that we want, we're trying to convince our co-workers that our way is the best way. And at the end, we make a bunch of trade-offs, and then we end up at a design that we may or may not believe in, but that's just how we ended up. So it starts kind of with a story. Earlier in my career, back many, many years ago, as a young researcher, thinking that I could solve all the problems of the world if I just talked to my users. And I could become a great storyteller and empower designers and convince PMs and tell engineers what they had to build. And I'd go off and do this great research, and I'd come back and be like, great, perfect method. Designer gets users. They want to build something for the users. And then I would start to see designs or the product. I'd be like, this is not what? This is not what we talked about. How do we get here? And I started to realize that we're constantly making a bunch of trade-offs. We're so busy, we're moving fast, everyone has their own goals, including myself, that we are aligned, but not actually aligned. And what we usually hear is that we can build anything, but we can't build everything. So we make those trade-offs. And who makes those trade-offs? It really ends up being things that we believe in, but we eventually saturate out because we have to move so fast. And end up building something like this. So you have zero idea of your app's potential users or your target audience, and you're using all these hypothetical situations because you didn't have time to do the research, or you had to make so many trade-offs, or you didn't have enough time for design exploration, and you end up with negotiations, constant trade-offs. And I mean, this is a common thing that we see all the time, and even at Facebook that happens a lot, right? So no one's perfect, but taking a step back, we wanted to figure out, why does this happen? So here is a nice giant post-it note from Julie Zhu at Facebook. I don't know personally, just so you know. And it talks about ignorance being the enemy of design. So as a researcher, I'm like, yes, like this is exactly what we should be doing. We should just be talking to users. We should just be going out there. We should just be connecting everyone. And so what did I do? I went and did research, got all the people to come with me or watch it. You know, it didn't matter how much you interacted with me. You could take part and drop in and drop out. And then what happened? The same thing. We ended up with that. I'm like, what happened? What could I have done better? What went wrong? Like, what prevented the team from really understanding like what we're trying to do? So I took a step back and thought, got too ahead. So how do I take a somewhat different approach? So I decided to investigate my work partners. I wanted to figure out what they were doing differently, or why we couldn't align, or why we constantly ended up with a different version of what we imagined in the beginning. And what I started to realize was that my work partners couldn't tell the same stories I could tell. They weren't great storytellers. Not that they didn't have the ability, but they are time poor, they've got their own goals, their own time pressures, their own challenges. And I wanted to figure out how we could make that different. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about the process and then some takeaways around how I and my team, not just me, how we made a more inclusive process for teams to have impact faster and build products. So I really like this quote, and it's from a friend of mine in the VR community, and it talks about how we are the masters of technology, but as designers and researchers, engineers, PMs, content strategists, even though you're not here, we shape technology and experiences for others, but we forget to shape our own experiences. We don't think about how we take a step back and figure out how do we work together in order to have a more aligned version of the world. How do we tell the same story together better? So this is kind of opposite what I was just saying, right? Move slow. Take a minute to think about how you ensure that your team is invested. So what I did is I went to talk to my team and figure out what their own personal goals were, what your personal goals are as an engineer, what your personal goals are as a designer, what your work pressure goals are, and how could we bake that into a plan that would help you get what you need and the team achieve the goal that they had set out to do. One of the ways we do this is, and really this quote from Carroll is, making sure that we, I'll just read out, one of the deep secrets of life is that all we're really worth doing is what we do for others. And it really resonated with me because I realized that in my quest to get the user centered up there, building products for them, that I really forgot about the goals of my teammates. And I really forgot about how do I make sure that they get what they need and I get what I need, and then together we have a shared goal of building a really great product. But it's really true. It's all about the team. And this is easy to forget when you're moving fast. You're like, shit, I got to go and make this research plan. And you over there, you're going to go and explore some designs, and you're going to figure out the technology. And what really ends up happening is you have this misalignment of people's expectations, mental models, and goals, and you end up with an MVP or a minimal viable product that doesn't actually meet anything that you set out to do. And then you get this feedback from research, and then everybody hates the researcher to say that, hey, this doesn't actually really work. And then it's a constant, again, negotiation and trade-offs between people. And so lesson 1, know your champions. So in your team, one of the things I wanted to make sure is I understood how do I bake in everyone's goals into design and research and product planning situation. And part of that is to understand what the individual goals and what the team goals could be together and make sure they were baked in. And lesson 2 would be to empower others. And this is kind of strange, right? When you want to create great storytellers, you have to allow them to take ownership of things that matter to them. So by baking in and knowing what their goals are, you're empowering them to meet those goals and giving them the opportunity to lead as part of this process really changes the way that they start to think about disseminating information and also how they start to work together with you. And part of that is leading without leading. And as a feisty Scottish person, this is kind of difficult for me at times. And again, especially if you're so enthusiastic about the user and you want to make sure everything gets done the right way, taking a step back and allowing others to participate or lead that process is really important. And what that gives them is a sense of ownership. And when they have a sense of ownership, then they become more invested. And that investment and that knowledge gives the ability to become better storytellers. So what does that process look like? You've taken a moment to step back, you've moved slow, you've tried to learn more about your teammates, you want to empower them, and it's not just about what you have to achieve, it's about what they have to achieve. And then suddenly everything starts to become a little bit more fluid and a little bit easier. And that negotiation process kind of gets put down in priority because you're all on the same page. You're all working together to meet this overall plan that's going to meet everyone's goals and empower everyone at the same time. So how do we move fast? We've set the scene, we've got these teams aligned. It sounds a little bit fuzzy, right? It's a little bit more about relationship building and understanding how people think and work. And one of the things I have taken this from is I quite like the concept of Edward Bono's 6-hat thinking. So it's a combination of using 6-hat thinking, which is thinking about how do you use different colored hats to take multiple perspectives and processes and to figure out the trade-offs. Combining that with a sprint, how do we think about using those two techniques together to figure out how we can move fast? So everyone knows a design sprint. You get a bunch of people in a room. You get designers, maybe a researcher, maybe. And you go through this process of exploration, thinking about how you think of the ideas, think about what your users need, go through that process, and come up with a couple of concepts at the end, and then go and work on them and get engineers to build it. It's kind of like a nice exploratory way of working. But how we changed it was rather than have a design sprint, the question is, when is a sprint not a design sprint, not a sprint? When it's just a sprint. And why that is that? Because in this process, we included engineers, content strategists, PMs, designers, and researchers all together who were all researching, all designing, And you think, wow, that's pretty chaotic, right? What does that mean? It means that you give the ability for others to contribute ideas in the very beginning, at the very start, so that you know what the engineering constraints are. Engineers get to have their point of view, what they think the design is, versus they've built something that doesn't align with the workflows or the mocks that you've given to them. And researchers get to highlight and tell that story throughout the process. And by taking turns of who's leading that day or that process, you're empowering them and you're giving them ownership. So therefore, they start to become better storytellers. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we use this process to go through a design sprint and build a product. And sorry, that's my bad. To run a sprint with content strategists, engineers, researchers, PMs, and designers, and build a product in just under 12 weeks, and a brand new product from scratch. So first of all, we were thinking a process of discovery, how are we understanding what our users' needs, talking to them if possible, and then really mapping that out for the team and getting them talking to users too. So as a researcher, and think back to our lessons, let others lead, we give the empower to engineers to talk to people too, right? You can get out there, you're part of it, they're the ones who are thinking about it, they're more invested, they're thinking about that time. And at the same time, you're kind of guiding people from the background. And then designing and building, that's the second part of the process, is when you're thinking about, as an engineer or as a designer or even as a researcher, you're getting out of your comfort zone, you're starting to sketch ideas, what you've learned from discovery process. And discovery is your constraints, it's also your needs, it's also your business goals as a PM, and then you're thinking about how do we make those ideas into something that we could possibly address. And then at the end, obviously, we want to do some user research because we want to go 360 full circle, and we want to make sure we're validating those ideas. And this sounds kind of like a linear process, but it's not, because remember, your whole team's with you the whole time. Everyone's building and designing and researching together, so everyone's on the same page. So this is how it kind of looks out in a stretched out process, where we are really condensing previous, how might we sprint ideas into something that's more inclusive, but more condensed at the same time. And the reason why it can be more condensed is because you have everyone together. So when you're actually thinking about understanding and prioritizing, it's not just based on research, it's not based on design, and it's not based on a PM, it's based on everyone. And coming to that conclusion, you can do that much, much faster. And then when you get to the second day, you're already thinking about ideas. You're already putting those ideas up on the wall. You're already talking through it and deciding who does what and voting together and making sure that once you've come up with that concept, design can go away and take those ideas and start to really think through the UX and the journeys. And in the meantime, while that's happening, the engineers already have an idea of what they have to build and the user stories that come along with it. So in parallel, they're designing and building and researching all together. So 6-hat thinking. I love this concept. And it's a little fuzzy, it may not be extremely scientific, but what researchers do that all the time, right? We always put the hat on of the user, we try to put our hat on of the stakeholder, we try to think about what recommendations we have to do based on the constraints of the product, and thinking about that, this concept of how do I not just be a researcher, how do I also think like an engineer, and empowering people in your team to do the same. How does engineers think like a designer? How do engineers think like a researcher? How do PMs think like a designer or a researcher? So already everyone's starting to understand each other's shared goals, think about the constraints and trade-offs based on the things that they're learning, and also empower others and become great storytellers at the same time. So in the beginning, we have to just super narrow the focus, right? Because we can't move fast if we try to do everything. Remember that quote at the beginning? We can build anything, but we can't build everything. And the only way to do this is to figure out what you're going to do for that week with your team, or 2 weeks depending, because scoping is super, super important. Thinking about how do you narrow the scope enough to make the time that you spend together productive. And then second is understand, right? We talked about understanding the insights and the main user problems, and that's for everyone. Everyone has to contribute to this, because you don't want to go down a path and then find out a week later that you can't build it, or you find that you're not meeting the core user needs, or design just doesn't think that's the experience they want to give people. And that's okay, right? And remember, six-hat thinking, you're already making trade-offs all the time, so your negotiation process becomes lower down in priority. And then we want to discover. We understand the needs of users. We're constantly talking to people and having that feedback in parallel as we're doing these other tasks. So maybe we spend a couple hours a day, or maybe in the beginning of the week, talking to the people that we care about to understand how they think about the problems. Are we framing and scoping the problems correctly? Are we on the right track? And then we want to prioritize. We want to prioritize based on the team goals. Remember, everyone's got their shared goals now. And we want to prioritize on the business goals. So we have to make sure that we're focusing that scoping on things that we really, really care about and that really, really matter. Or else we can't move fast. And then we sketch, right? We start to do those ideas. We start to put them out. We've got our constraints. We know their users. We've done discovery. We've figured out what parameters we have to work within, and then we want to come up with ideas. And again, empowering others to take charge of that process. I've seen engineers lead design reviews based on feedback they've had in user research sessions, encouraged by designers to do so. And then when it comes to that time when design goes away and comes back with those mocks and design concepts, the engineer knows why the rationale behind it and why it's important. And it's really just like getting out of your head, right? Because that's what happens all the time. We have these ideas in our head, we have these expectations, we have a mental model of how things should be, and then we don't share that with people. And then we have to go and negotiate, and we have to tell our own story to other people and hope that they get it. But using this process, we can forgo that. And then we decide, So we've gone through our concepts, we've come up with ideas, we've sketched them out, and then we want to make sure that we are prioritizing the key things. And what that means is thinking about the right people in the room, whether it's engineers, researchers, content, everyone's got a voice. We give everybody a voice to make sure that the trade-offs are being highlighted, the design constraints are highlighted, engineering or business goals or things that we have to do in a certain amount of time are prioritized. And we make this a team effort. And then we map out the user journeys. And this normally is a design-led thing, which it still can be. And it's not to take your role away from each other, right? So a researcher is still a researcher, a designer is still a designer, but this time we're all wearing different hats, so we get to be empowered and think about things differently in order to move fast. And then we're building prototypes, we're designing at the same time, we're getting feedback from users, and sometimes it's a prototype, but in this instance that I'm talking about, we built the product at the same time when we're doing all this. Because we have engineers in the room who can tell the right story, who can go away and come back, or be in the room with research and design to build the product in parallel. And then we're doing research, right? We're taking those prototypes, we're taking those things we've built at the end of the week, and then we're going back to users and making sure we're doing the right thing. So in this room, this is a great example. We have some designs on the wall. We have some designers there. There's me doing some research and people are observing from remotely. And I'm in the next room. We have engineers building and making changes as they hear the feedback from the prototype. And this is something that we did on a regular basis for 12 weeks to build a product. Now, when we talk about a sprint can be 1 week or 2 weeks, and that's why it's really important to scope. Because if you keep moving fast, you can really lose things because you're so focused on the process, not on the goal and the experience and the team needs. So it's really important to balance those. And then at the end, we want to go back to the debrief, right? So we saw here, we're capturing all the notes, we're building things in parallel, and then we just want to go back and prioritize, making sure that everyone can tell the same story, that we heard the same things, and without negotiation, and then start the next week fresh with the new sprint. So what are some of the takeaways that we want to talk about? So we want people to be champions of storytelling. We want to enable team learnings, not shared learnings. And we want to have concrete impact to research. And what that means is there's no chance that anything that is interesting is forgotten because everyone is empowered. And we have quick turnarounds to build products, right? We're building things either straight into the roadmap or we're building the product in parallel. And that means we get to do it fast. By moving slow in the beginning, we get to move fast later on. And sometimes we forget that. Sometimes we forget to take that moment just to stop, take a second, breathe, think about what actually we're trying to do, especially when we have all these pressures. Now, saying that, it's not always good to keep doing it, right? There's times when this process isn't applicable. You can overdose on working like this. You can get burnt out really easily. It's not always applicable to move fast and build a product like that. Sometimes you have to take extra discovery. Sometimes you have to do some groundwork. Sometimes that concepting and sketching stage might need to take a few weeks. But overall, it's the inclusion process that makes it easier and gives you more impact when building products. So going back to our favorite quote, we need to remember that we're not only shaping technology for users, we're also shaping technology and how we work for ourselves. And by thinking about that and remembering that, we can move fast and have better impact in products. Thanks.